At a magic academy named Regarden, the only thing that is valued and cherished is magic. Those who cannot perform magic are considered the most useless, like you. There is a student named Will who is the only one in the academy without any magical talent. Will's way to survive in this academy without magic is to venture into the 7th floor of the dungeon. Below the academy lies a dungeon where students go to earn points. Will is seen fighting a monster that is several times bigger than him, but he manages to defeat it easily. This is Will's way to survive in this academy without magic, by hunting monsters in the dungeon. On a bright day, the students of Regarden Academy are studying in class. There is a long-haired teacher named Edward. Despite his rocker appearance, he is a strict teacher. Will, who is engrossed in taking notes, is suddenly called to the front of the class. Edward asks Will to perform the magic spell that he has just taught. Will is asked to create a small fire from a catalyst and transfer it to a stone. Will carefully recites the incantation, but the result is still nothing. He is immediately laughed at by his classmates and scolded by Edward. Will is actually smart. His theoretical grades are excellent, but he just can't perform magic in practice. Edward knows this, which is why he hates Will so much. Suddenly, a red-haired boy named Sion shoots fire magic at his catalyst. Oh man, what a show-off! That immediately makes Edward badmouth Will, even telling Will to leave the school. What kind of teacher is he? As soon as class was over, Will was suddenly approached by Sion and his cronies. Typical annoying kids who think they're cool. They just came to tease Will. They called Will out for only getting credit points from hunting monsters in the dungeon. Then suddenly, a girl named Colette, a typical model student, defends Will. When Sion is reprimanded, he becomes even more arrogant. Before leaving Will, Sion takes the time to mock Will's dream of becoming a Magiavander. As Will walks away, Colette tells him not to take Sion and Edward's words to heart. Will doesn't mind because it's true that he can't do magic. In fact, Will is even happier because he was defended by this cute girl. Oh man, Will even flirts with the girl. Of course, Colette is immediately embarrassed. Colette is out of breath from being praised so much by Will. Colette feels embarrassed. A princess can't be teased so easily, while Will is so light-hearted in his speech. Will then falls silent and looks up at the sky. He thinks that the sky today is so beautiful, and that behind it there is a Magiavander who keeps the sky so bright. So in this world, humans were once trapped in darkness and no one had ever seen the sky. Plus, humans were oppressed by the threat of invaders from heaven. Then 5 great wizards appeared. With their magic, they drove away the invaders and created a huge barrier in the sky. The barrier pushed away the dark clouds that covered the earth and allowed the sun to shine on the world again. Since then, humans have begun to live in peace and glorify magic. These 5 wizards are called Magiavander, a title for the strongest wizards, and everyone at this academy dreams of getting that title, including Will. As she looks up, Colette can only wonder if the ice princess named Albus is watching them from above now. Then Will has a flashback to when he was playing with his female friend named Elfaria. The two of them dreamed of seeing the moon and sun from the real sky, especially seeing the beautiful sunset. And that sky could be reached when they became Magiavander. From then on, they both dreamed of becoming Magiavander and promised to watch the sunset together. Elfaria is a genius wizard. All her grades are perfect, and she became the youngest Magiavander in history. Elfaria has been at the top of the tower for a long time, while Will is still a loser because he can't do magic and he can only get credit points through the dungeon. The next day, Will was scolded by his teacher, Werkner, for endangering himself by repeatedly entering the dungeon recklessly. Moreover, the floors he visited were getting deeper each day. Despite this, Will remained stubborn, knowing that if he didn't improve, he would be expelled from the school. Fortunately, he managed to defeat an evil guard and earned 2 credit points. However, Werkner warned Will about his dream of becoming a Magiavander. He explained that to achieve this, Will needed to reach the top rank in the academy. His credit points had to be the highest, whether from written exams, magic realization, or practice. Will, however, excelled only in theory. His magic and practical skills were abysmal. To make up for the credits in those 2 subjects, he had to hunt monsters in the dungeon, as the stronger the monster, the more points he would receive. Despite his lack of magical abilities, Will remained determined and refused to give up. Werkner, out of pity, informed Will that he still lacked credits for the semester. He needed 4 credits and had to fulfill them within 2 days. Will immediately searched for information on monsters worth 4 credits and realized that Werkner was probably the best teacher in the academy. Werkner then informed him about a Baskerville monster that appeared on floor 6, worth 4 credits. Will immediately hugged Werkner and thanked him. However, Cyan, who had been eavesdropping on their conversation, overheard them. Cyan quickly ran off, determined to defeat the Baskerville monster before Will could claim the credit. Will eventually reached floor 6 and searched for the Baskerville monster. He had previously fought a Baskerville before, and his cat, Kiki, despised fighting them. The last time Will fought one, Kiki was scorched due to the Baskerville's fire breath. Meanwhile, Sion and his party had already reached floor 6. Sion was obsessed with getting Will expelled from the school. Sion's friends were worried because they were only a small party in the floor 6 dungeon. However, Cyan was arrogant and underestimated the dungeon's dangers. Suddenly, Gordon was knocked into the air. When he turned around, he saw a monster there. Lyral screamed in terror, and his voice reached Will's ears. Will immediately took action to investigate. He ran quickly, and upon reaching the scene, he saw Cyan trembling in fear. The magic Cyan used to attack the monster was completely useless. This wasn't the Baskerville they were looking for, but an evil sentinel, a monster worth 10 credit points. This monster usually resided on deeper floors. They were shocked to find such a powerful monster on floor 6. If left alone, Sion would surely die. Will wanted to help, but he suddenly remembered that Cyan was the one who always bullied him. There was no benefit for Will to help Cyan either. Will hesitated whether to help Cyan or not. He could also run away if he wanted to, but suddenly, a light appeared in his head. The light made Will remember the past when he and Elfaria were still together at the academy. Elfaria truly believed that Will was the kindest and bravest person she knew. Elfaria was also the one who gave Will the goggles he always wore. Because of that, Will didn't want to break Elfaria's trust. So, Will stepped forward to save Cyan. At the academy, Edward suddenly yelled at Werkner because he received information that Cyan and his friends had gone to floor 6 of the dungeon without permission and without escort. So, Edward told Werkner to send his bird to look for Cyan. They eventually saw what was happening on floor 6 through a crystal ball. Werkner immediately calmed down because Will was there. But Edward clearly underestimated Will. They continued to watch Will together from the crystal ball. Will was incredibly strong. He was fighting the monster all by himself. Even though he didn't use magic and was small in stature, his physical strength was extraordinary. Will dodged all of the monster's attacks and could counterattack with his speed. Cyan was just dumbfounded by Will's abilities. Edward, who saw Will's actions, couldn't believe it. How could a student with no magic be so strong? Werkner then explained that Will had talent. His strength was truly overpowered, and his observational skills were beyond human logic. Will had always been able to survive monster hunts in the dungeon because he had an uncanny ability to read an enemy's attack patterns with just a glance. This allowed him to land massive hits. Suddenly, the monster's arm and sword flew off. Seizing the opportunity, Will grabbed the giant sword. Just as the monster was about to cast a spell, Will countered with a brutal attack, reducing the creature to dust. He approached Cyan, who was standing there dumbfounded and crying. Instead of thanking him, Cyan started complaining. What an odd guy. Edward wasn't far behind, echoing Cyan's complaints. It was as if these two had a pact to be jealous of Will. They refused to acknowledge his strength, and Edward stormed off. The next day, Will was met with an angry Werkner. Werkner scolded Will for being reckless, but also acknowledged his hard work, awarding him 10 credits for defeating the evil sentinel. Will was relieved to stay in the academy. Flashing back 5 years, 10-year-old Will was constantly ridiculed for his inability to use magic. His dark circles rivaled those of corporate slaves. Rumors circulated that he was only admitted to the academy to lure Elfaria in. Once Elfaria became a Magiavander, they deemed Will useless and wanted to expel him. Will met with the headmistress, Cauldron, who silently handed him a sword. When Cauldron attacked, Will effortlessly parried her magic. Werkner was shocked, but Cauldron seemed to expect it. Cauldron allowed Will to continue his studies. Will then asked for a chance to catch up to Elfaria, and Cauldron agreed on the condition that Will prove himself. This fueled Will's determination. Back in the present, Werkner was teaching their class. He explained that to ascend the tower, they had to get into the higher institute and become top graduates. It was also a requirement to become a Magiavander. To enter the higher institute, there were two ways: create a new spell or accumulate at least 7,200 credit points. Since creating a new spell was difficult, most students were just farming credits. The students were struggling to even meet their credit requirements for this semester and got scolded by Werkner, who made them all do remedial work. Even though Werkner was kind, his remedial assignments were brutal. All the students struggling with the remedial work were having a hard time. Meanwhile, in the next corridor, Lyral and Gordon were spreading rumors that Cyan had defeated the evil Sentinel alone. Everyone thought Cyan was incredibly strong. Cyan himself remained silent and didn't correct them, not wanting to ruin his reputation. Coincidentally, Will walked past them and Sion confronted him. Luckily, Colette separated them and Sion left. Colette suspected there was some personal conflict between the boys, but Will didn't want to talk about the incident in the dungeon. Out of the blue, Edward got angry at the headmistress and demanded that Will be expelled. This teacher was acting really strange. Since Will was in his final year, it would be unfair to expel him immediately. Edward apparently disliked people who couldn't use magic but had high aspirations. Cauldron checked Will's records and found that he had perfect grades except for practical magic. Will was actually a model student, but Edward insisted on his expulsion. Cauldron gave Edward a chance to test Will. If Will passed Edward's test, he could stay. If not, Edward could expel him, and Edward could design the test however he wanted. Of course, the jerk Edward saw this as a golden opportunity and wouldn't hesitate to make Will's life difficult. Meanwhile, at their lockers, we found Colette helping Will lock his lockers. Since locking lockers required magic, Will was embarrassed that he couldn't do something so simple. Luckily, Colette didn't mind and was happy to help. She noticed a sword in his locker. Since students weren't allowed to bring swords into school and leaving it in the dorm would upset his roommates, Will had stored it in his locker. Will and Colette continued studying for their remedial exams. Colette was impressed with Will's dedication, as he was always reviewing the material. He even had a perfect memory for history. Of course, Will had to compensate for his 0 magic score by excelling in other subjects. Because he studied so hard, Colette noticed a few gray hairs on his head. Poor Will, he was aging rapidly. Just as they were studying, Edward surprised them. With a sinister grin, he told Will to come to the auditorium. Of course, it was for the test, but Edward claimed it was a remedial exam. Will was surprised that this terrible teacher would offer him a remedial exam, especially a one-on-one. Edward explained that Will had to land 1 hit on him. If he succeeded, he'd get 5 credits. If he failed, he'd be expelled. Will was terrified. At the same time, Werkner was called to Cauldron's office. Cauldron wanted Werkner to watch the test between Will and Edward. Werkner was panicking, but Cauldron said she wanted to be fair since she'd given Werkner a chance to mentor Will, so she was also giving Edward a chance. Werkner didn't mind Will being tested again, but didn't agree with Edward being the examiner. Edward had once been a top candidate for Magiavander, but had failed due to a lack of credits. It was unfair for Will to have to face off against such a bitter teacher. Will was really struggling against Edward. Even though Edward was only using low-level magic, his skill made the attacks incredibly powerful. Will didn't give up and tried to counter with a kick, but Edward's magic barrier blocked it. Edward mocked Will for trying to fight magic with a kick. Will's glasses fell off and shattered. He felt like a lab rat. Making matters worse, he'd left his sword in his locker. Will was racking his brain, while Kiki, who had been injured, quietly slipped out of the auditorium. "Where are you going, Cat? Why are you running away?" Edward gave Will a break by only using 2 spells, a fire spell for attacking and a barrier spell. But these were his signature spells and he could even layer them without incantations. Will was overwhelmed and tried to dodge the attacks, but there were too many. Edward was having too much fun, treating Will like a pest. Will couldn't stand anymore and knew he couldn't win, but he forced himself to continue. He didn't want to be expelled. Meanwhile, Kiki had gone to the locker. Luckily, Colette was still there. Colette didn't understand what Kiki was doing, but when Kiki stared at Will's locker, she figured it out. She opened the locker and ran to Will with his sword. In the auditorium, Will was lying on the floor, unable to do anything. Edward kept asking why Will was so desperate to become a Magiavander. Will replied that he wanted to stand beside the person he loved, Elfaria. Edward was furious and felt that Will was belittling the title of Magiavander. He thought it was ridiculous to want to become one just for love. Edward was about to finish Will off when Colette arrived and threw Will his sword. Will transformed into a god of sword, easily cutting through Edward's magic. Edward unleashed all of his magic, blinding everyone, including us. Will was scared, but he didn't give up. He dodged all of Edward's attacks and aimed for his blind spot. With a powerful strike, he shattered Edward's barrier. They both stood there in silence, and then a cut appeared on Edward's cheek. 5 credits for you, Edward said as he walked away. Will had done it. He wasn't expelled, though he fainted immediately afterward. Cauldron was overjoyed, while Werkner was relieved. They were both impressed by Will's determination. Congratulations, Will. Will often dreamed of the day Elfaria told him he was the kindest and bravest person she'd ever known before giving him a special pair of glasses as a farewell gift. It was the day Elfaria had to leave for the tower forever because she had become a Magiavander. As Elfaria slowly walked away, Will called out her name, telling her he would definitely reach the tower even if the whole world tried to separate them. He promised her he would come to her and they would watch the sunset together, as they had promised when they were little. Tears flooded Elfaria's eyes as she heard this, and she turned around, wiping her tears, and told Will she would wait for him. Soon after, Elfaria ascended the tower stairs, and Will was left alone and heartbroken. Professor Werkner tried to comfort him, but only made Will cry harder.
I know.
However, Will promised Werkner that this was the last time he would be a sad, crying baby. Back to the present, Will was up early delivering newspapers to houses around town. As he finished his work on the street, a strong old man named Donnan greeted him and told him to do his best. Will then quickly climbed the stairs but tripped, causing all the newspapers in his bag to fly out. But with lightning-fast reflexes and nimble arms, he caught all the newspapers in an instant. Unfortunately, one newspaper slipped through his grasp, and as Will picked it up, he found a news article about Elfaria, who had just created a new type of magic. She had achieved the feat of becoming the first witch in history to create 12 types of magic. Will was once again filled with determination to work hard so he could stand beside her. As he read the article further, he found that the High-Level Institute had issued an order to the Academy students, and the client of that order was none other than Elfaria. Will was shocked to learn this and immediately ran to his dormitory, where he asked his roommate Rosti to make a magic item for him. Rosti asked why he was so excited, and Will told him about the order issued by Elfaria so he would participate. He started changing into his uniform while telling Rosti that the order was to obtain the core of a monster called Frost Walkers found on the 4th floor of the dungeon. Apparently, Elfaria needed it as a catalyst, and every student who helped obtain the core would receive a reward. That's why Will wanted Rosti to prepare a magic item that could help him clear the 4th floor. Seeing him so enthusiastic and honest, Rosti started laughing. He had been working on a magic item that Will used from time to time and gave it to Will. Will thanked Rosti and started to leave, but she stopped him, stuffing bread into his mouth and telling him to take care of himself. Will soon reached the 4th floor of the dungeon, but it was already crowded with dozens of students hunting Frostwalkers for their cores. As Will was about to join in, a massive explosion shook him. It was an attack from Sion, who destroyed many Frostwalkers in one blow. While his followers praised him, Sion wasn't satisfied. He thought about his fight with the giant monster, which fueled his anger and motivated him to become stronger. Unaware of this, Will truly believed that Sion was cool. He thought there was nothing left to hunt here, so he went deeper into the 4th floor, but encountered a giant penguin monster. The monsters were hostile, so Will quickly drew his sword, put on his special glasses, and attacked them. With a few clean strikes, he managed to easily cut down the penguin monsters, saving a bookish girl who was almost killed by them. The girl was stunned by what she had just seen. Will had defeated the monsters using a sword, not magic. Will approached her, and the girl thanked him for saving her life. Before introducing herself as Iris, a fourth-year student at the academy. At the same time, Werkner was giving a lecture about the greatness of creating new types of spells, saying that it alone was enough to make a wizard who created such a spell ascend to the tower. He said that new forms of magic were named after their creators, and if anyone in the class had ever created new magic, they would have their names carved in history. The students started gossiping that this approach was impractical because only the top 0.1% could do it. Then, a student named Rose asked Werkner if Elfaria, who had created 12 new forms of magic, was really that great, and she said she couldn't believe it. Werkner called Elfaria one of the greatest witches in the history of their world, and Colette commented that Will's childhood friend, whom he had a crush on, was truly special. Rose teased Colette, asking if she was jealous that Elfaria would steal Will away from her. Colette blushed at that, and because of that, they were scolded by Werkner. Back in the dungeon, Will walked with Iris, who had heard about Will the bookworm with no magical talent. Feeling down, Will asked if Iris felt bothered being with a loser like him. Intrigued, Iris questioned how she could look down on her savior. She said that even though Will didn't have magic, she respected him for his unique abilities. Feeling embarrassed, Will changed the subject to the order issued by Elfaria. Iris agreed, saying she wanted to help the Magiavander support the sky. Her words made Will think about how no one in the world had ever seen the real sky. The great magical power of the 5 Magiavander enveloped their world, hiding it from space invaders. What they saw was a fake sky, a great barrier that kept their world safe. According to legend, when the fake sky fell, darkness would envelop the world again and chaos would ensue. That's why the students here followed the order, not only to gain reward from the Magiavander, but also because they wanted to support the sky so it wouldn't fall. Will was brought back to reality when Iris told him she had met Elfaria before. She recounted a story about how she was in trouble in the dungeon one day when various kinds of evil monsters surrounded her, and she was just waiting to die. But suddenly, all the monsters froze. Iris turned around and saw Elfaria glowing in the sunlight, looking like a goddess. Elfaria gently helped her to her feet, and ever since then, Iris had idolized her. While Iris was engrossed in her story, Kiki drew Will's attention to a strange-looking area on the ground. Iris asked what Will was doing, and Will showed her a large ice fragment left behind by the Frostwalker as they moved. This fragment was enormous, and now Will was sure that a very powerful Frostwalker was ahead. He started walking towards the cave in front of them, and Iris asked how he could be so sure because she hadn't found any trace of the Frostwalker using her search magic. Will replied that magic was great but not absolute, especially in the dungeon. He told the girl that on top of this belief, he also had knowledge and experience. Iris didn't understand what Will was saying, but Will was fully alert because he knew what was going to happen next. A giant frost walker had been hiding on the ceiling and pounced on Iris, who was an easy target. However, Will had anticipated this, so he moved quickly, carrying the girl to safety place. As the monster fell to the ground, he jumped away quickly, and Iris recognized the giant ice monster with dozens of eyes as a Frost Rex, the highest evolutionary form of the Frost Walker. The monster roared loudly, and Iris remembered that the Frost Rex was a very dangerous monster worth 6 credits. Meanwhile, the monster charged its ice laser and fired it forward. But Will managed to jump out of the way, and the blast filled the area with sharp ice spikes. Leaving Iris in a safe place, Will moved to confront the monster. Iris stopped him, explaining that physical attacks wouldn't work on a Frost Rex, whose power was so great it could freeze a strong dwarf with a single touch. Will equipped the magic item Rosti had made and told Iris not to worry because he had defeated monsters like this many times before. He attacked the Frost Rex, dodging its ice beams with jumps and landing behind the monster. He slid under its body, and when the Frost Rex couldn't find him, it began firing ice beams randomly, forcing Iris and Kiki to flee. Will then circled the monster and threw the magic item onto the Frost Rex, where it attached itself to the monster's side via a hook. Will slid under the monster again and tightened the rope around it, causing the monster's body to crack. He continued wrapping the rope around the monster's body until it was completely restrained. The enraged Frost Rex attacked wildly, and just as Will had finished preparing the rope for his final attack, he stood in front of the monster. The monster used its freezing breath, which began to freeze Will's skin, but he knew his work was almost done. Frost Rexes were weak against fire and explosions, and that's what Will would exploit. He created friction on the magic item in his hand, sending a flame traveling along the rope until it reached the magic item, which was a powerful bomb. The device exploded, shattering the giant monster into pieces. As the smoke and steam cleared, Will rolled up Rosty's magic item. Then he collected the Frost Rex's ice core. Iris had watched all of this and saw Will defeat the giant monster without magic. Her expression suddenly changed. She wasn't just a nerdy girl. She was an agent for someone high-ranking. She had discovered that Will, the boy with no magical talent, was stronger than she had ever heard. She was puzzled about how to report this to her superiors. Then, when Will told her they should return, she went back to pretending to be a nerdy girl and left with Will. Later, Iris went to the White Tower and entered a room where 4 of the 5 Magiavander sat on their thrones. They were looking for talented individuals who could help them prepare for the day when the sky fell, and Iris worked for them. She reported that she had seen great talent in Will, the boy without magic. Iris recommended that he be recruited to work at the tower. 2 of the Magiavander strongly opposed this, but a white-haired man named Zio was interested, while Elfaria simply smiled. Zio was willing to let anyone talented stand beside him, even if it was a dwarf. But Eleanor was unhappy to hear that because the elves believed that dwarves were very barbaric. Cariat stopped them from arguing and said they didn't have to make a decision now because they could wait to see Will's performance in the upcoming Grand Festival. Everyone agreed, and they left one by one, leaving only Elfaria in the room. And it turned out that Elfaria was the one who had told Iris to monitor Will. Elfaria then took out the giant core that Will had sent her and repeated her promise to wait for Will to be with her in the tower. A few days later, at the Regarden Magic Academy. Out of the 12,000 credit points available at the Academy, students are required to gather 7,200 credit points to be eligible to enter the Higher Institute and pursue the position of Magiavander. Several students are taking an exam, including Scion, who uses his fire magic to destroy a golem and has now gathered over 9,000 credit points, passing the exam. Even Khalid has earned over 7,000 credit points and has also passed. Now, it's Will's turn, but he can only dodge the golem without counterattacking. Just as he is about to strike, another student taunts him for being unable to do anything. This distraction causes Will to be hit by the golem's attack. After that, Lihanna is shown using powerful magic to destroy the golem, earning her a total of 10,100 points, ensuring her success. There is also an elf named Wignall who possesses strong magic and has over 10,000 credit points. Suddenly, an ice mage named Julius appears, using his magic to defeat several golems. He has over 10,000 credit points. Afterward, he approaches Lihanna and Wignall, declaring war on them since the Grand Magic Festival is about to take place, and they are the only 3 students with more than 10,000 credit points. As Julius is about to leave, he encounters Will. Julius arrogantly tells Will that he is a failure with no magical talent and orders him to leave. During a meal with Khalid, Will is encouraged to participate in the Grand Festival because written and practical exams alone are not enough to enter the Higher Institute. Even if he doesn't have the required 7,200 credit points, some students are still recruited into the tower. It's revealed that the Grand Magic Festival is an event held at Regarden Magic Academy every 2 years, featuring numerous magic competitions. This festival is often used by mages to scout promising talent, and the tower factions see it as an opportunity to recruit gifted students, significantly influencing their path to the Higher Institute. Among the attractions are the Thunder King's Magic Wand, the Grand Fairy's Magic, the Fire Emperor's Wand, and the Ice Queen's Magic Wand. Despite the absence of the Light King's Wand, there are still 4 Magiavander factions watching closely. If one of the factions likes a student, they will be recruited. Will said, "Students like us won't be recruited if we haven't met the graduation requirements unless we can show magic that's more impressive than the senior mages." Of course, the odds of that happening were about as likely as a cat learning to bark. Will added, "Someone like me who can't even cast a basic spell won't be allowed to participate in the festival. And honestly, that was probably for the best. If Will joined, the Magic Festival might turn into a talent show for broom sweeping. Will actually participated in the festival during his second year, and it was such a disaster that it became the most infamous 50th Grand Magic Festival in history. If Chaos had a poster child, it would be Will in that moment. Because of that, he got blamed for all the trouble, and now he's pretty much traumatized by the thought of joining the festival again. Can you blame him? However, Khalid said that if he can't get into the higher institute, there are still many paths to success. When Will and Khalid went to the student lockers, Khalid noticed something strange. She felt the presence of concealment magic that hid both existence and sound. She tried to break the barrier using Kiki's magic, and sure enough, inside the locker was a hidden room where many students were gambling. They were betting on which student would win the grand festival. Khalid was shocked to see Cyan there and asked why Cyan and his cronies were there, even though it didn't look like Cyan was gambling. His cronies roasted Cyan, saying that of course he was there because no one was betting on him to win the festival. This infuriated Cyan, drawing everyone's attention to him. Cyan declared that he would not lose to the top 3 students in the Grand Magic Festival. Later, Will went to the Dwarf Tavern where he worked. The dwarves were having a blast after a long day of work. Mr. Donnan was there too, feeling sorry for Will, who had to juggle delivering newspapers in the morning, studying at the academy during the day, and working at the tavern at night. It was like watching someone live through the world's longest day in the life video. Mr. Donnan asked if Will would participate in the Grand Magic Festival, but the look on Will's face said it all. He'd rather do just about anything else. It turned out that Rosti was also working there to help Will because one worker had quit. The dwarves said that Will seemed to be managing fine on his own. While washing dishes, Rosti asked why Will worked there when the pay was so low. He wondered why Will didn't ask Mr. Workner to find him a better job. But Will didn't want to trouble Mr. Workner, and he liked the dwarves, who welcomed him warmly. He had great respect for them. Suddenly, a spoon fell, and when Will picked it up, he saw Julius and his cronies entering the tavern. Julius laughed when he saw Will working there, saying that a nobody like Will belonged with the dwarves since neither of them had magic. Cyan mocked the dwarves, which made Mr. Donnan furious. Julius arrogantly said that dwarves were nothing more than lowly creatures who only survived in this world out of pity. It's well known that the dwarves' world was destroyed long ago by an invasion from space, forcing them to flee to this one. Unlike the elves, dwarves can't use magic, which means they're usually treated like the world's worst-kept secret, ignored and looked down on because, in this world, magic is everything. When Rosti served a bowl of bean soup, Julius and his cronies mocked it, saying it was trash food, just like the dwarves. Will overheard them and, like any decent person would, he stepped up to confront Julius. He demanded that Julius take back what he said about the dwarves. After all, those beans were the result of hard work, something Julius probably wouldn't recognize if it hit him in the face. But instead of apologizing, Julius kicked the bowl of soup, splattering it all over Will's clothes. Honestly, these two goons were probably hoping for a Best Supporting Villain award with their antics. Will, however, didn't waste time. He suggested they introduce their faces to the floor, and let's just say, they got pretty familiar with it. Must be big fans of gravity. As a result, Julius ended up drenched in beer, which didn't exactly improve his mood. Furious, he warned Will that he didn't know who he was messing with. But Will wasn't fazed. He shot back that Julius and his kind were far worse than the dwarves, lower than animals in fact. Julius just laughed, claiming it had been ages since someone dared insult him like that. Naturally, he whipped out his ice magic and attacked Will. But when he caught sight of Will's intense glare, he stopped his assault and instead challenged Will to participate in the Grand Magic Festival. Julius wanted to humiliate Will in front of everyone. If Julius won, Will would have to leave the academy. But if Will won, Julius would have to apologize to the dwarves, especially to Mr. Donnan. Fast forward, the Grand Magic Festival was about to begin. The headmaster gave an opening speech, and the festival kicked off with colorful magical fireworks lighting up the sky. Talent scouts from the fire faction were ready to spot the next big star. The first event was the Sky Race, and everyone was betting on Lihanna to win. The talent scouts watched closely as the students competed. Sure enough, Lihanna shattered the record and claimed victory in the race. Meanwhile, Iris, who was assisting the headmaster, asked for permission to leave and take care of some tasks, though it was clear she was really going to cheer on a senior she admired. On the other side, Cyan was getting pumped up by his cronies. He was over the moon because Khalid had finally recognized what a great student he was, asking him to join her team. He was thrilled, thinking Colette had chosen him over Will, the walking zero. But when he opened the locker room door, Cyan was shocked to see Will and Khalid together. Khalid then explained that Will was actually part of their team. The reason she invited Cyan was purely because they needed his credit points to meet the 21,000 minimum required to participate in the Crown War. Cyan, too confident for his own good, didn't realize he was just being used by Khalid so that Will could join the Grand Magic Festival. Cyan was furious at Will, insisting that a zero like him had no business in the festival. But Will completely ignored him, too busy watching Julius walk by. Feeling overlooked, Cyan's anger toward Will burned even brighter. Meanwhile, the first session of the festival wrapped up, and the afternoon session of the Grand Magic Festival was about to begin. The commentator this time was Mike Myas, with a special guest appearance by the Academy's least favorite professor, Edward. Naturally, Mike was more than a little nervous standing next to the rocker teacher. To kick off the Crown War competition, the members of the fairy faction began chanting spells to create the competition arenas. The Volcanic Zone, Swamp Zone, Barren Land Zone, Grassland Zone, and Forest Zone. The Crown War featured teams of 3, each starting outside a zone. The stadium served as the finish line, with a crown at the center as the prize for victory. Each zone was filled with traps, and teams were free to use any means necessary to win, including attacking other teams. Basically, it was a magic version of a battle royale game. The crowd's favorites were Team 12, led by Wignall, and another Team 12, led by Julius, and this fool commentator had bet all his money on Team Wignall. Meanwhile, the team with the lowest expectations was Team 6 because it had Will, the walking zero. The participants began entering the competition arena. Werkner, who was there, was shocked to see Will competing. He immediately tried to convince Will to back out, but Will was determined. The competition began, and the participants sprinted toward the stadium. Their first challenge was a group of giant golems ready to turn the participants into stakes. The audience gasped as Will charged straight toward the golems, thinking he was about to become a 1-second snack. But, surprise! With Khalid's magic, Will managed to defeat the golems with a single strike, leaving the audience in stunned silence. Using Khalid's magic gloves, Will, the supposed zero, was the first to break through the golem line. Cyan, watching this, only grew more envious of Will. Thanks to Will, Team 6 took the lead and entered the Barren Land Zone. It was full of traps, including stone cannon magic. But with his magic gloves, Will deflected the flying stones. After that, he asked Colette to summon a sword spell, and suddenly, it started raining swords. Will quickly threw the swords to destroy the magic boxes above. One box fell, but that was no problem for Will. He even celebrated like Cristiano Ronaldo, leaving Cyan in disbelief that Zero Will could pull that off. The talent scouts from the Fire faction were impressed by Will's speed. Edward remarked that Will moved like a seasoned dungeon explorer. Iris, meanwhile, was shouting encouragements at Will, even though, let's be honest, it wasn't like he could hear her from there. Team 6 was still leading, leaving the other participants in the dust. Yep, those NPCs were as useless as they looked. Julius ordered his cronies to check out the current situation. They reported that Will had already gotten ahead of them. Julius smiled as he unleashed his ice magic. Meanwhile, Team 6 entered the forest zone where they encountered a series of chain magic traps. With some quick thinking, Will redirected the traps, making Edward click his tongue in annoyance. Will had a plan to overtake the other teams and set up an ambush. But surprise! Out of nowhere, ice suddenly attacked Will. Of course, it was Julius who had already shown up. Will was puzzled about how Julius got there alone. He probably ditched his 2 cronies behind because, well, who needs friends when you're that self-centered? Julius wasted no time launching his attack on Team 6. Cornered, Will prepared to fight Julius here. But then, out of nowhere, Cyan appeared, engulfed in flames, ready to unleash a massive fire spell to wipe out everyone in front of him. Khalid quickly told Will to get out of Cyan's way. Luckily, she managed to save Will just in time. The entire stadium was in a panic from the tremors caused by Cyan's fire magic, which incinerated the trees around them. Cyan then told Julius to back off and not interfere with him. It turns out Cyan had been planning to attack Will all along. As Khalid tried to protect Will, she was suddenly hit by an ice attack from Julius, who had somehow survived. Will urged Cyan to stop, reminding him that now wasn't the time to fight. But Cyan was determined, insisting that Will pick up a sword and take the fight seriously. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and like to support this channel. Love you guys.